Hey friends, with news coming in that Greece has voted no on Sunday's referendum, it's a great victory for freedom, it's a great victory for the people of Greece. But as Michael Snyder from Economic Collapse blog reports, it also threatens to unleash unprecedented economic chaos all over Europe and perhaps beyond. This interview with Bill Holter was recorded on Friday, global margin call, and although we didn't know the outcome of the vote on Friday, today's vote guarantees that the global margin call is on its way. Thanks for watching. Here's Bill Holter.
If you have the ability, if you have capital, and you want to get that capital from here, from the current system, to whatever the next system is going to look like, whatever the next system is going to be, your best and easiest way to do that is with gold and silver.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome back. We have on the line Bill Holter, who's going to take us through the very complex derivative story, the CDS story, the story of what is really going on behind the scenes. Has Greece technically, actually defaulted? That's the big question. Bill, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Let me just start with this today, Bill. It's from my friend Jeff Nielsen over at Bullion Bulls, because this is such a complex story. And Jeff asks, where is the global bond margin call? And let me just read this to you. He says, Greece already defaulted at the end of 2011, and every penny of those billions in euros was backed by the same fraudulent credit default swap insurance. Was there a global bond margin call in 2012? No. What did happen? Nothing. The same big banks who underwrite the tens of trillions of this fraudulent pseudo-insurance are also allowed to self-regulate their own market. I think that's a great place to start, Bill, because this is very complex stuff as we've been talking about the collapse and the domino effect that a Greece default would cause. So, with that said, where would you like to start today? Because are we seeing a global bond margin call?
We're certainly seeing liquidity dry up, and we can talk about that shortly. To answer your question regarding default, yeah, they defaulted. I mean, they didn't make payment 2 days ago. They can't pay. They don't have the money to pay. They'll never have the money to pay. It is a default. Now, the big question in the derivatives market is there a trigger or is there not a trigger? And to this point, they say no, it's not a default. It's just a matter of time at this point, because broke is broke. And like the Jeff that you read his writing, that's what we're headed for, is a global margin call of the credit markets. And that's what it's all about. It's not about the stock markets. It's not about the commodities markets. Yeah, there's leverage in those, but the credit markets worldwide, and in particular in the U.S., is the foundation, the cornerstone, whatever you want to call it, to the value of everything. Everything is valued based off of bonds, based off of credit. And at this point, liquidity is drying up across the globe. There was an article, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday. It was carried by Reuters. And London is now becoming very concerned because even small money managers are having a hard time offloading bonds at the current quoted prices. In other words, let's say they've got not even a big lot, a 10 million pound bond that they're looking to sell. They can only get 2 million off at the current price, and that wipes out the bids, and the next bid may be 2% lower. And the problem with that is now those bonds have to be marked 2% lower, or 4%, or 8 or 10, wherever they can finally finish their order. And all of these banks that are carrying those same bonds, now they have to remark those bonds down in their portfolio. So these balance sheets will take huge hits. And it's a function of there's no liquidity. Nobody can offload anything. And there's your margin call that's the beginning of your margin call.
Okay. It reminds me of our conversation with Dave Kranzler recently, in which he said the exact same thing. There will be a time where these people holding bonds get trapped. When the liquidity dries up, you're trapped. You're trapped in your position. You're stuck with what you got. That's what we've been warning people about for so long, Bill, is that you better have what you want to have when the collapse comes, because you're going to be stuck with what you got.
Yep, I've been saying that for a couple of years. The other place that liquidity is drying up, and you can see it very clearly, just look at the Chinese stock market. Less than a month ago, their index broke through 5,000 to the upside, and yesterday they broke through 4,000 to the downside. So in less than a month's time, their market's down 20%. And they have huge margin. I think it's the last number I saw was something like 386 billion in margin, and they're opening up, 4 million accounts per week? I forget what it is, but it's the people had flocked into the stock market, and now they are somewhat trapped.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how that unwinds.
Yeah, when these bubbles pop, people get hurt. And let's talk about the derivatives bubble, because this is such a complex issue. Can you just help us break it down just a little bit? Let's just sort of slow down time and level set, because JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank alone hold $70 trillion in derivatives contracts. I was listening to your interview with the doc the other day, and of course you were already scheduled to talk with me the very next day. And you said in that interview, and I quote, "This time, there's no white knight," end quote. The central banks have no bullets left, Bill. They can't bail out the too big to fail derivatives losers. So have they officially said that Greece has defaulted in terms of derivatives and CDS, these insurance contracts? Because if Greece defaults, that's how the dominoes start to fall. Right. What's going on behind the scenes? How are these banks going to bail themselves out? I mean, I think Citibank alone, according to Jim Sinclair, has somewhere in the neighborhood of $56 trillion in derivatives. It's just hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. And when will the dominoes officially start to fall? Or are we seeing it, or are we not seeing it?
It is probably happening behind the scenes. You mentioned 70 trillion between Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan. That's 70 trillion each. So just between those two, it's 140 trillion. Technically, no, they have not declared Greece a default. So you've not seen a trigger. You've not seen the winners tell the losers to pay up. But as you mentioned, there is going to be a call. Once there is a default and you get the domino effect, there is going to be a call. The winners are going to tell the losers, we want to get paid. And there is just not, Greece alone, you're probably looking at 3 trillion worth of credit default swaps. There's not 3 trillion extra floating around anywhere to pay the winners. And like I said, or have been saying, there is no white knight. There is no one that can come sweeping in like they did back in 2008. Hank Paulson with his $700 billion bazooka. There's no bazookas. We've already gone through 4.5 rounds of QE. Europe has done QE. Japan has done QE. China is doing QE. There's nothing left. There's the next time, whenever it may be, and I suspect it's going to be shortly because liquidity is telling me that. When we get this margin call, there's no one on the planet that can meet the margin call.
Right, and that includes Deutsche Bank. Pardon?
It includes the central banks.
Well, absolutely. But I just want to make the point that Deutsche Bank, if everyone recalls, the co-CEOs resigned on June 7th. Right. And they've got $3 trillion exposure in terms of insurance on these derivatives that they themselves will need to pay out. They don't have it. They don't have $3 trillion on the books. They talk about illiquidity. They don't have the cash.
Collectively, there's not 3 trillion. Collectively, there's not a trillion that could be paid. If there was a call for $1 trillion or €1 trillion, collectively, worldwide, that amount could not be paid out to winners without these big money center banks going under.
Right. Okay. And there's no white knight to save Deutsche Bank. All right. Well, then let's bring it down to the micro level for the little guy, right? So for the people that are listening, and guys, no offense, but we're all little guys compared to the Jamie Dimons and these money masters, these too big to fail money masters who have been in control of our government now since the foundation of the Federal Reserve and beyond. and even before that. Let's bring it back down to the micro level for the little guy. We know what's going to happen as the dominoes fall, right? We know what happens when a country defaults. Look what happened to the Greek pensioners, right?
Right.
Look what happened to the ATMs. I mean, people standing in long lines to get $160, €160, 200 bucks. What do you say, Bill, to the people who are listening that think this can happen here? And even if it does, they have FDIC insurance on their money in the bank. There's nothing to worry about. They're insured.
Right. Well, first off, FDIC only has, I think it's less than 1/4 of a penny for every dollar that they insure. But you're still talking about a government entity. So if you're talking about a government going bankrupt, the government entity itself is certainly not going to pay. I do want to mention, because I've seen on a lot of the comment sections that, oh boy, this is another gold and silver infomercial. Well, no, it's not. You asked about the little guy. The little guy needs to protect himself from the banking standpoint. You're seeing people in Greece on Monday queuing up in lines. They should have already had their money out. You should have the bulk of your money out of the banking system. And the little guy has to start everyone has to start at square one. You got to have food, you got to have water, you got to have supplies, you got to have meds. You need to do the things to sustain you on a daily basis. That's number one. Now, I'm a believer in gold and silver, but that's for people who have capital. If you're just an average person and you've got, you're renting or you own a house and you're making a monthly mortgage and you don't have a lot in the bank, pull out what's in the bank. You should definitely have some silver. You need to start with silver after you buy your food supplies. Is this gonna be a 2-week or 2-month distribution breakdown? I don't know. It could be more. It could be 6 months. It could be a year. I have no idea how long it's going to be. But you need to stock up on your personal supplies. Once you're done with that, then you worry about your finances. Once you're into your finances, you start with silver because that's going to barter. And silver, there's a portability problem with silver. If you're talking about $100,000, you can't lug that around in silver. But you could easily do that in your 2 front pockets with gold. It's doable. You could carry 80 coins. You can't carry thousands of silver coins. The point I'm trying to make is, if you have the ability, if you have capital, and you want to get that capital from the current system to whatever the next system is going to look like, whatever the next system is going to be, your best and easiest way to do that is with gold and silver. So there's your gold and silver infomercial, but that's after you build up your life supplies. And life supplies are everything. I mean, do you have firewood? Do you even have a lighter? I mean, you need to go through and I think I said this to you last time, it's not a bad idea to just shut your lights off for 2 days and see what it's like to live that way. Do a trial run. Oh, I forgot lighters, or I forgot flashlights, or I need batteries, or whatever. You're going to find out if you shut the power off for a couple of days, you're going to find out where the holes are in your plan.
Yeah, I like what you're saying here because it really resonates with me based on what we've seen in Greece. Again, we got to take current lessons and learn from them. We see this collapse happening really in slow motion. I always say this, we're documenting the collapse in these interviews, Bill. And, boy, if we can't learn from what we've just seen happen in Greece, then we can't learn. We're incapable of learning. And basically what you're saying is that if you aren't going to protect yourself while you still have time, right, because our banks are still open, you're going to really regret it when we find ourselves in the same situation as the Greeks, right? Those who did not protect themselves a month ago when the banks were still open, that they did not get their 200 euros or their 2,000 euros or their 200,000 euros out while they still had a chance. They are living in endless regret today because now they're in the abyss. They're in the unknown. Try to take some steps to protect yourselves today while you still can, because as Jim Sinclair has said, the world has already ended and most didn't even notice it. And I think it's important that we talk about the crazy stuff going on in precious metals derivatives, Bill. You note that these criminal banks have now upped their positions in precious metals derivatives to $3.8 trillion. I was reading the report from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and Citigroup's precious metals derivatives position alone jumped from $3.9 billion in Q4 2014 to $53 billion in Q1 2015. We don't know exactly what's going on, but to me, Bill, that's the smoking gun that proves precious metals matter. Gold and silver matter, and they matter a great deal to these criminal banksters.
Right. We don't know whether they're long, whether they're short. There's no way to know. But to put that in perspective, global supply is only $100 billion a year. So the jump of 50 billion in cities derivatives, that's 6 months worth of global production right there. And the big number was the discovery of the OCC when they announced the amount of derivatives went from 200 and something billion to 3.9 trillion. I mean, what is that? I can't even fathom that they piled on another 3.5 trillion. How many years of global production is that? That's 35 years plus of global production.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we saw very little volatility.
Yeah.
You never saw gold move more than, I'm not sure that we've seen more than a 2% move up or even down this year.
Yeah, they're stomping on the price, and I think we know why. I mean, if we go back and rewind time to when Adrian Douglas was still alive and doing his research, I think back in 2011, 2010, I was reporting that his calculations put the real world gold unsuppressed price per ounce based on all the hypothecated and rehypothecated paper gold out there, not to mention the physical gold. The real world price could be $50,000 an ounce. Fast forward to today, we see these guys stomping down on the price with $3.8 trillion in derivatives. Can you even imagine what 1 ounce of physical is truly worth? You said 100 billion in actual real world supply. Well, much less for silver. I mean, I think if we're looking at a billion ounces of silver at $15.50 an ounce, it's a $16 billion annual supply of silver. It's infinitesimal. It's infinitesimal. Right. And it has value. It has tangible value. It's hard to see. I know it's so hard to see because they've been stomping on the price forever. Wouldn't you love to know how high this beach ball would go once this manipulation ends? I sure would.
We're going to find out. There's no question about that. And if you put those two together, that the price has been stomped on, it's been collared, that's absolutely clear. If you put that together with the lack of liquidity in the credit markets, there's your answer. They cannot allow gold or silver to go higher. They cannot allow the herd in the credit markets, in the bond markets, to get spooked. Once they get spooked, there's your margin call.
Yeah.
So that's your reason. The reason for the absolute collar is there can be no excitement, there can be nothing in gold and silver to attract capital.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, let me read this to you from Michael Snyder. I think this is just a hilarious headline. Barack Obama promises that events in Greece and Puerto Rico will not cause a global economic crisis. You know, this reminds me of Baghdad Bob. Do you remember Baghdad Bob, Bill? Back in the invasion, the freedom event when Bush sent in troops to topple Saddam Hussein, Baghdad Bob would say the infidels are being crushed, their troops are being decimated as we speak, and in the background would be American tanks, U.S. tanks. It's amazing to me that Barack Obama would even bother saying such things, because for him to promise anything can only work on the brainwashed sheeple, because all the man has done is lied. He said he wouldn't sign secret treaties. He's working on the TPP. He'd honor the U.S. Constitution and cherish it. At every turn, the man has not been truthful, and now he's promising that what's going on in Greece and Puerto Rico will not affect us. And in fact, I should just read this. He says, "This is an issue primarily of concern to Europe. I think the markets have properly factored in all the risks involved." I think that's funny coming from a guy whose number one donor was Goldman Sachs.
Well, he just signed 19 executive orders, I guess it was last week, that Congress is not even privy to. Um, that reminds me of Alan Greenspan back in 2006, 2007, talking about the the MBS was going to be contained. It wasn't contained. And all of these credit incidents, they all matter. They're all interconnected. And they will matter big time. They will all be part of the margin call.
Yeah. Well, I think it's insane that he says, I think the markets have properly factored this in. It's primarily of concern to Europe. Perhaps he's forgetting that JP Morgan is an international bank. Perhaps he's forgetting Citigroup is an international bank. It's lunacy to me that he's trying to calm the nerves of the people, but that's the paradigm we're in, aren't we? I mean, the fiat dollar depends on the confidence of the people. So the con game would be to calm everyone down and tell everyone everything's fine. Everything's fine. Don't think about what's going on in Greece. Do your shopping, hit the stores, support the economy, go out to dinner. Everything's fine. But everything's not fine, Bill. I mean, that's the bottom line of this conversation, is that everything is very far from fine.
Well, everything's very far from fine. And what you had mentioned before, the Greek people they had months and months or even years to prepare. But yet you see these big long lines of people trying to get at their money. And yeah, there was 100+ billion euros that had been drained over the last 6 or 8 months. But you also saw store shelves go empty within 24 hours. And it's going to be the same thing here. It's mathematically going to be the same thing here. I wrote about that, by the way. Greece is not already in the market.
Yeah. No, it hasn't been accounted for, has it?
It's not accounted for. There's nothing that's accounted for. This is, if you want to talk about something, let's talk about the credit market being the biggest bubble in the history of history. That's what it's all about.
Right.
So the whole thing is all about the margin call that we talked about before is a margin call to the biggest bubble in the history of history.
Yeah, and let's remind people of that. I think our interview, This Is How People Will Lose Everything, really resonated with people because, again, CNBC and the mainstream Mockingbird financial media and the mainstream Mockingbird general media, ABC News, NBC News, CBS, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, they don't want you to look at those credit markets. They just want you to look at the stock market. Everything's fine as long as the stock market's higher. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's absolute chaos breaking out in those credit markets. When the SHTF hits the fan, that's how they'll lose everything.
Well, as I mentioned, the credit markets are the bedrock, the foundation to everything. The credit markets are now in the biggest bubble in the history of history. You could add all the bubbles together. You could add the tulip mania, the South Sea bubble, the 1920s, 1987, the 2000, 2008, put them all together. And the credit market today is bigger than all of those put together. That's how big of a bubble this is. And the margin call that comes from this bubble deflating, there's not even a possibility for it to be met because the money does not exist to meet it.
Yeah, and to pour salt into an open wound, Bill, we're seeing reports last week that Americans not in the labor force have soared by 640,000 to a record 93.6 million people not in the labor force. Labor participation rate has dropped to 1977 levels. This is the devastation of the U.S. labor force, according to Zero Hedge. And of course, it's only going to get worse under the TPP, which will farm out even more manufacturing and real jobs to third world nations for slave labor costs that benefit corporations, not the people of the United States. Since 2007, the U.S. has lost 1.4 million manufacturers and gained 1.4 million waiters and bartenders. We're in a lot of trouble here, Bill, regardless of what President Obama wants to tell the American people. And so when Obama promises that events in Greece and Puerto Rico will not cause a global economic crisis, you know that it will.
They will.
It will.
You can bet on it.
Yeah. Well, these are scary times, Bill, aren't they? Isn't it just scary to know that this government is literally doing, at this point now, anything it wants to do regardless of the will of the people? I mean, it's astounding to me. The people who know about the TPP were against it and vocal and calling their senators and congressmen. They pushed through the fast track anyway.
We were sold out. The American public last November got rid of all kinds of past senators and representatives. The Republicans took power in both houses, and yet with this TPP, they're the ones who supported what Obama wanted.
Yeah.
We were sold out.
Yeah.
We tried to throw the bums out, and we got different bums. That's all.
Yeah. Well, you know as well as I do, and all the listeners know, that this false right-left paradigm is the control mechanism they use on the American people, right? I mean, look no further than Hillary and Jeb in 2016. Right. Those are criminal cartel family members who serve the Rothschild, Rockefeller, fiat bankster empire. Fact. It's undeniable. It doesn't matter what crimes they commit. It doesn't matter about the private servers in Chappaqua in her home. It doesn't matter. Facts are facts. They're criminals, and they never, ever go prosecuted. They never get prosecuted, and that is what is absolutely killing us. The American people are waking up, and yet what do we have? What do we have? There's no rule of law, and because there's no rule of law, there is no justice. Right. I'm starting to feel like, what the global economic margin call is? It's an American margin call, and these people are serving their masters in China. These people are offshoring everything. They're serving their masters in the city of London. It's a margin call on the United States on the debt, and they're just selling off everything, and they're enslaving us to pay their masters. That's how I feel at this point. All of these politicians are bought and paid for, and they're serving their fiat bankster masters.
I agree, and if you listen closely, you've heard Obama talk about it. You've heard President Xi talk about it. You've heard the Pope talk about it. You've heard about an equalization of the standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, then the standard of living has got to fall on the U.S. and it's got to be moved up elsewhere. And what you were just talking about, that's exactly it. Is that they're trying to put a margin call on the United States, and it will ruin our standard of living.
Yeah, and it's all by design, and I know people are feeling very, very, very frustrated, and I am too. But that's why we have these conversations. I mean, we all need an outlet. You're not going to get this information from the Mockingbird mainstream media. They won't have these conversations. They'll ignore the TPP, and they'll concentrate on two escaped fugitives who got out of, for days and days and days and days and days, and they will not talk about the Greek economic collapse and what it means to us. They will not talk about the derivatives bubble. They will not talk about the 19 trillion in national debt. They will not talk about the secret TPP, which has been fast-tracked. They'll talk about these other divisive issues, and that is the ultimate frustration, and that's why the Mockingbird mainstream media is dying. They can't die fast enough as far as I'm concerned. Bill, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Bill. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your support at SGT Report, thephaser.com, of course, and thelibertymill.com. Real news, truthful news, 24/7. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great week ahead. God bless.